All right, hello, welcome to week 7. Today's topic is understanding art meta. So we're looking at this class from the outside. So just to let you know, this will be more of me talking, less about the slides, and so it'll probably be a little bit shorter this week than usual. All right, so do you trust me? Here are my qualifications to teach this class. I was hired to teach this class at Lynn Benton Community College, which is where I teach at. I have been teaching here since 2018. This is my fourth time teaching this class. I haven't been fired. And I have an MFA in art, and I got that in 2016. And here's a sample of my artwork. I purposely chose something silly and simple. Yeah, just like I talked about in the beginning of the class the first day, it's really important for you to think about who's teaching the class and what is coming from this person that you trust or that you might not trust. If you're taking an art class and you don't like the teacher's artwork and they give you harsh criticisms, then you might not trust them as much. But if you like what they're doing and they give you harsh criticisms, you might listen to them more. So um, I think it's really important for you to think about every teacher that you have, not just this class, and really see where they're coming from. So I'll get back to that in a minute, but this is how I choose which art to show. So most of my art consumption comes from the people I follow on Twitter. So um, I don't do Instagram or like TikTok or the whatever or Pinterest, but I use Twitter quite a bit. I started using Twitter specifically to follow indie game developers, but then it turned out like, oh yeah, there's a lot of cool artwork and stuff online. I primarily use Twitter to for myself to look at cool stuff that I like. And it just so happened that that works to collect artwork for this class as well. So so I only show artwork from people I follow. And people I follow are obviously people I want to follow specifically for my tastes. I don't engage in political discourse directly. I find out news from it. So I kind of avoid like news sites or whatever. It filters in through me. News filters in to me through other avenues, other people I follow. But I generally tend to follow artists of all sorts, and especially if they're very heavy on posting their own art, and if they post too much text, I don't follow them. So so that's how I kind of choose a lot of the art. And so this artist right here, Leonora Carrington, she has an Artbot account. An Artbot meaning a bot on Twitter, like an automated program that posts art from particular artists. So there's art bots for Salvador Dali, for example, or Picasso. But this one is Leonora Carrington. I don't know much about her. I just thought this is cool. I love surrealism. So she's a woman, and it just happened like, okay, I like this. I'll post it here for this one. And by the way, the images don't have anything to do with the text most of the time, unless like this, I specifically talk about it. So this is the avenue in which I um, look at art and consume art. I don't really go to galleries very much, not only because they're closed down, but because I'm not really a fan of um, how do I say it? I like the more. I feel like consuming art through the internet is way more democratized and feels more equal than an art gallery. Like if it's art gallery's free, sure, I'll go. But I'm not comfortable with the system within gallery. Most galleries reside. There are definite exceptions in town that are definitely more about or less about rich collectors. So there are exceptions, but generally I prefer to look at artwork on the internet. So I've been trying to show more women and people of color, but a lot of the people I follow have furry or abstract non-representational avatars. I think I'm doing better than even last year. So yeah, I think, and I'll talk more about women and people of color, but those are represented less in artwork in general, and so I try to tend towards that. But like I said, I follow what I want to follow specifically, so a lot of that is furry art. Um, Sometimes I can't tell the background of the person, um, even if they're gay or straight, or what race or ethnicity, or where they're from, or their age. Sometimes I don't know any of that, and I really like that because it, again, it sort of, it could be anything, right? However, yeah, I do try to include more women and people of color again because they get passed on more often. But again, I'll talk about this later. More interested in what's happening now. Most of my favorite artists are still alive, so I'm I generally tend to show artwork that has happened. Actually goes with well with the last point. Most of the images have been posted within the previous week of when the slideshow was made. So all the images that you'll see here, they've been posted on Twitter within the last week in my feed. So some of it, like this, comes from 1938. This is one of the exceptions to the rule. Um, well, there is no rule because I like it. Doesn't time doesn't matter for me. It's do I like it how it looks right now. Um, Stuff that's necessarily like historical, that doesn't really appeal to me as much because I have to read into the story, and I'm kind of just into more of the tone and the feeling of a painting rather than the meaning behind it. So I'd rather just sit in front of a painting and stare at it, and absorb things that way than reading about it. And may mean something to me, may not. But that's just more often than not how I like to absorb artwork. So th- that's why there's not many history paintings that I show. I'm sure there's a lot of symbolism in here because there is with surrealism, the movement. But I just think it looks cool. It's really psychedelic in the sense that it's mind expanding. It's outside of what's possible to experience within the normal state of mind. So it's very biased. I'm more interested in small, weird, experimental things than well known, impressive, expensive things. So, this point is basically like I don't want to be shown the same thing over and over again. Um, and I've taken several art history courses, and there's a lot of overlap between what's shown as important and what's left out is left out, and I don't really get to see that stuff. And that's kind of with the same thing with just art in general is, well, here's stuff that I can see that's easily visible to me. I want to dig a little bit deeper and see what's maybe not shown as much, or maybe what's a little bit weirder, because I'm really into psychedelic experiences of what's weird, what's impossible to replicate in real life, right? So things that sort of challenge my perception of what a drawing or what art can be or what music can be. That's what interests me quite a bit. So yeah, and I'm not good with metaphors, symbolism stuff beyond the surface. Kind of covered that, but yeah, it's not my type of thing. There's a couple other teachers, or the other teachers who teach it are much more well versed in that. In fact, I substitute the symbolism iconography lecture with video games essentially. So you'll learn more about video games and symbolism if you take my class as opposed to anyone else's class, which I think is great because you can just kind of, because people learn different things from different people, and some this might work better for you, but or it might not. It's just kind of whoever you signed up for. Subject position. All right, so we talked briefly about this, but it's the exact person that I am, created by things such as identity and background. Some parts of my subject position that influence my interest in art include identity, cis male, which I'll talk about more, gay queer, I'll talk about more, Mexican American, feminist, politically independent, very left leaning. So my identity definitely contributes to what can I identify with. For example, um, oh geez, I just forgot his name. Jacob Lawrence, who is a famous black painter from the mid-century. Um, I I have a hard time relating to his paintings because there's a lot of subtext about being black in them, or actually, it's in a lot of the descriptions, and it's not aesthetically pleasing to me, unfortunately. If I did a little bit reading about it, then I'd probably like it a bit more. Um, this is Sam Gilliam. This is a black uh, artist, painter, sculpture, just artist in general. I don't know what his work's about, but I like it. Um, and to me, it's because it looks, it's immediately appealing to me, right? So, does that mean I, like, for example, gravitate towards Mexican American or Mexican paintings more? Not necessarily, because even those experiences, I might not be able to rate to them. It's if I want to, I can read it. I'm just kind of lazy sometimes and kind of shallow, but that's my problem, right? I'm biased towards looking at things that immediately interest me and are in my wheelhouse. So I'm very ignorant of Jacob Lawrence's paintings, unfortunately. I know how important they can be, and he's probably underrepresented in the art world, and I'm part of the problem, right? Just because I have this barrier of not liking his aesthetic, right? Um, I could probably learn more about Sam Gilliam. Maybe this does have to do with the black experience. I don't know. There's plenty of other black artists, such as Jacoby Satterwhite, who's a gay black artist, like that talks about blackness and queerness. Um, I can relate to that more because also he's more contemporary. I'm also queer, you know. And I have a lot of privilege as a Mexican American who grew up in a very Mexican heavy town. So I have a different experience, you know, but again, it's my ignorance for not learning that, and I think it's important to recognize your blind spots. So, yeah, and I also gravitate towards feminism as well, and identity politics, stuff like that. So, other things that really factored into this is my mom worked at a community college as the art department secretary. So, just based on that alone, um, yeah, I have a lot of exposure to art because I'm literally around artists all the time growing up. Her colleagues are artists and art instructors, just like I am. And so, of course, that has a, a big impact on me growing up looking at art. Also, because it's a college too, and colleges are definitely more open to art than say high schools in general. Um, there's tons more classes in college than there are in high schools. So yeah, I grew up very lucky. Would I be an artist? Would I be here talking without that? Maybe, maybe not. I have no idea because that's where I come from. So I have this hugely biased perspective of art has been important my entire life. You know, yeah, I'm from Southern California, eh, lower middle class. So I made $18,464 last year. So I'm not. I'm yeah. I think I'm like around the poverty line technically. Um, so that kind of prevents me from doing things. However, I only live. I have a roommate. You know, I don't have tons of bills to pay for. I don't have any kids. I don't have. I only have a snake for a pet, which is like $20 a month in food, and that's pretty much it. So I have, even though I'm lower class technically, I still live a middle class lifestyle, and I can talk about art, right? Which I'll go into more. So yeah, the point is the way you learn about art has a bias, and there is no such thing as complete subject objectivity about art because everything we see is influenced by who we are. All right, so in art history, we learn in the U.S. The art history we learn in the U.S. generally favors English-speaking, white, upper/slash middle class straight men. Let's unpack this a bit, because just saying that doesn't really mean anything unless we really think about it. So English-speaking, this is obviously important because I can only speak English. I'm an American, obviously. So there's a lot of reasons why English speaking is favored in the U.S. Pretty obvious, but if you can't understand the language, it's more difficult to understand what's being communicated. That's kind of obvious, and it goes to the next couple points. It's coming from a different culture where nuances, little details are understood by outsiders, and translations are imperfect because they rely on nuances. So, um, in case you're not aware, translating from one language to another isn't just throwing it in Google Translate and making corrections here and there. The thing is, different languages come from different cultures. Even English is different between here and Great Britain, for example. English here in Oregon is different than Florida, for example, or Massachusetts or Ohio. So even though we can understand each other, there's still a lot of nuances, which is basically little details of how one thing turns into the other. So not only are there differences between our English and someone else's English from across the country, but think about how it is from like any other language. For example, Japanese. There's we don't even share the same alphabet, right? And there's a lot lost within those translations from the Japanese languages to English using Roman lettering. With Roman lettering meaning just the letters we use that we know as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. So it's not just we lose words, but we also lose a lot of like things that are important to the culture that only can exist in that language. There's jokes that can only exist in one language, but not another. For example, there is a lot of words in German that apply to um, that only work in German, and maybe we know it in German as English speakers. Um, I can't think of one right now. Um, Gestamtumwerk or whatever the video game word from last week. That's a bunch of things encompassed into one. We don't have an English word for that. Um, so that's important to consider that. Well, if there's something easy to understand here and something difficult to understand here, it's probably likely to, if you have to choose between the two, it's probably likely you'll gravitate towards the things, or it's easier to talk about the things that you understand better, right? Instead of saying, "Oh, I don't know what this is. I have to do research," or I can just quickly understand this. So that's kind of a problem. Just put in more work, basically. Like I talked about Jacob Lawrence. Like I don't understand his work. I'm ignorant of that. There's a ton of stuff I'm ignorant of. But it's where you prioritize your time, and you can't learn everything. And viewing non-English speaking cultures as inferior, racism obviously exists, and it's pretty messed up. And it ties into other things, so we'll go on. So white. So white is generally meant to imply European. Much of art history we learn comes from European academia. So my race is technically white, and people who identify as Arabic are technically white. Um, we're not treated as white, because white is a very weird, unspecific definition for a group of people. What does it mean? I don't know. It's very complicated, and I don't understand it completely, and that's fine. So every textbook I've seen, most humans are overwhelmingly white, just like Oregon. The numbers don't lie. Um, so it kind of sucks that a lot of the art I like mostly comes from white people. Um, well, that doesn't suck. It sucks that there's not more diversity, is what I'm saying. So part of the reason that is because people who are not white are generally excluded from like these weird avant-garde circles, right? Because a lot of artists mm, are exclusionary. I'm not going to say racist. I mean exclusionary, which includes racism, sexism, ageism, stuff like that. Just exclusionary in general. Like they want an inner circle, and if there's someone different than them, then they don't want them to come in. You know, I mean, we all do that in some sense, right? We choose our friends and we exclude other friends. Like even if we're excluding people who are toxic to us, who are abusive to us, we're still excluding them, right? And so people who group together um, will tend to exclude others who aren't like them, and uh, that generally happens with artwork quite a bit, actually. Again, the numbers in the textbook of what you see, there's no contest that white people are the overwhelming majority. It's objective. Um, yeah, and again, that a lot of that has to do with just in group, where the people you're familiar with can talk about ideas, and sort of be in this bubble that's insular. Insular meaning like within a space and just like keeping it like that. Um, there's practical uses for that, such as focus, but that might exclude other interesting ideas that might strengthen that. It's definitely possible for outgroup people to weaken that foundation, weaken that focus, for sure. And it just so happens through imperialism and racism power that the white people, again, whatever that means, are in charge of everything, just through power relations. So that's why there's pretty much mostly white people in art that you see. It's just a systemic thing. Um, it's a huge problem, and some people are trying to address it. I'm trying my best. Like, I am far from perfect. I'm extremely flawed. But it's also important that I recognize that in myself so I can try to improve. So this ties into racism, of course. Viewing non-whites as inferior is a serious problem. Obviously, like everyone's aware of this. We lived through 2020. Um, if you're brown, you live this every day of your life, pretty much. But I think the BLM protests in 2020 were really great because they really brought the attention to that, to people who might not see the problems going on. Um, and it became a huge mainstream thing, which hopefully people are still like understanding and holding on to those ideals, right? Um, basically, like black people are killed more often than white people, by percentage wise. Um, and of course this comes from systemic injustices meant to sort of keep people of color in lesser positions, less powerful. And this is reinforced with artwork, right? Because the more white people you see in artwork, the more you think, okay, this is a domain for white people. Um, Definitely the case for me. Um, Even in California, there was more white people than people of color doing art. Um, and this ties into class as well, which is another factor that I'll be talking about. So we'll go on And are there nuances and exceptions? Of course, but that tends to be represented significantly less. Um, that that goes into the idea of tokenism, which is, well, like on this college catalog, there's like five white people and like one black person, and they're all smiling together, as a way to show, oh, we're diverse. So there's always this problem of hoisting up like one or two people of color in a sea of white people and showing them, oh, this is, or showing everyone like this is our diversity, right? Um, but it's really just an expression of insincerity of trying to look good instead of actually doing good. So yeah, there's definitely black people who make it into the art history books, for example, like Jacob Lawrence. But they're not often talked about. And when they are, they're held up as an example of this guy represents all of African American experiences, for example, right? Whereas I would rather go to Jacoby Satterwhite, who again is black and queer, so I can relate to that more, right? I'd rather hold him up as an example than Jacob Lawrence because I don't understand anything about Jacob Lawrence and what it was like to be black in the 20th century. Again, I should read some more about him. I'm going to do it actually. Um, but yeah, but again, like I probably could tell you more about him if I learned about him, but I didn't. I just there's a picture or two that I've seen in the art history textbooks, and that's kind of it. All right, let's move on. Upper middle class. So art costs a lot of money. Only a few can afford it, and this often excludes the artists themselves. So, yeah, it's kind of messed up that a lot of artists who make art can't, like, whatever price they sell it at, they can't afford to buy it themselves. Um, so it's kind of skewed towards the upper middle class. Pardon me. Going to college to learn about art costs money. Side note, please apply to as many scholarships as you can. That's helped me tremendously. I wouldn't be here without them. So yeah, if to learn about art costs money, because again, high schools aren't as supportive of art, and colleges are when you like really learn about art because there's more funding, more classes, etc., etc., and that costs money, unfortunately. Um, and this ties into the next point. Being able to study art is a privilege. Careers in art don't have the stability of STEM and trades and such. So some parents won't let their kids do art because like it's so unstable. What are you gonna do? Like work at Starbucks for the rest of your life? And by the way, a lot of people who graduate with an MFA in art, a master's in art, do end up working at Starbucks. Um, it's a stereotype that exists for a reason. So yeah, I was lucky enough where my mom was happy when I moved from biology to human communication to art because she knew I belonged in art. But I know people who are stuck in um, like business, for example, because their parents want them to. Because let's face it, like there's not that many art jobs compared to jobs that deal with businesses. Like the numbers are there. Um, my friend Laura talked about how it's actually easier to get a job in art than you think, which I guess is kind of true. Maybe not necessarily as an artist who makes a living off art, but doing other things like teaching, for example. Um, but I didn't want to teach at first because it was like, well, there's not that many teaching jobs, especially in high school. The high school I went to only had two classes, so I figured might as well do biology. I think it's cool, and there's more jobs available in general. Turns out that calculus is really really hard, so I ended up eventually going to art, and I found success here because that's the only thing I really cared about, to be honest. And having the time to make art is privilege. If you're working more than one job trying to make ends meet, you're less likely to be able to have time and energy to make art. So, yeah, again, that goes to the fact that a lot of jobs, full time jobs, like just drain you where you don't have energy to make art. Luckily, I'm able to live off a part time job. which is perfect for me. So I have enough time to make art on my own, and that's very privileged, right? And I'm able to do that because I was able to get my master's degree, and I was able to get my master's degree because I did my bachelor's and my AA, which I got help from my mom financially as well as the government, a lot of help from the government. Um, I don't think I really paid myself, so I had to pay myself. So I'm lucky I didn't have to work because if you're working and you go to school, um, then you have less energy to dedicate to your studies. So I was fortunate enough to be in the most amazing supportive situation, right? And that allowed me to really excel at what I was doing in art in order to get to where I'm at. Whereas people who don't might not have the support of parents, like might have to work full time and go to schools like part time. It takes years and years, and so that's something that's probably less likely to happen if you're with art because it's again there's less guaranteed payoff than something else. And last point, the bigger the city, the more galleries, museums will be around. Big cities means money. So yeah, it costs money to go to cities. Obviously, we live in Eugene, or sorry, I live in Eugene. 2 hours to Portland, and that costs money to get there. So I'm not around all these big exhibits, right? There's some local galleries around that I can go to, and that's cool. But if I, well, a better example is shows, like music shows. Like there's a lot of bands that go from San Francisco all the way to Portland with not stopping in Eugene. So I have to pay extra money to go there. It kind of sucks. Actually, it really sucks because I love going to shows. But same thing with galleries and museums. The bigger the city, the more galleries it will have, obviously, and the more you'll be exposed to art. So, and again, if you are working so much that you don't really have much time to do anything for fun, you might not go see art. So, um, so art is basically an upper middle class thing, unless you're lucky, or you do scholarships or some other fortunate circumstances. So, um, yeah, people who already have money can afford to buy art. They can afford to take time off to go to museums and galleries. Um, it's kind of how it is, despite the fact that a lot of artists are lower class people. Straight, so approximately 90% of the population identifies as heterosexual. Ugh. Hopefully, that'll be changing more and more as people sort of realize it's fluid. Um, So, just like any minority group, LGBTQIA people will be represented less often and we're seen as weird or outsiders. This is especially true for trans people. So, this is kind of obvious, that we, as queer people, weren't able to marry until like a few years ago. That kind of freaking sucks. And we're treated as lesser. And um, I would say the art world is a little bit more inclusive than they are of people of color, um, but definitely not nearly as much as straight people. I mean, but the funny thing is, there's a lot more queer people that I have in my classes than I do in my actual like art classes, like studio classes, I should say, as opposed to this general ed class, right? There's a lot more queer people, so a lot of queer people do tend to go towards art, maybe because of trauma and wanting to express themselves, or need a way to escape from the heteronormative world. There's many reasons why this happens quite a bit. So, but we're not represented as much as we should, obviously. All right, men. So men are privileged, obviously. This is a poster from the Gorilla Girls from the 80s, I believe. Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? So less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. Next one, same thing, Gorilla Girls. Compares 1985 to 2015. how many women had one person exhibitions at New York City museums last year. So this shows the inequality between men and women, and this is including trans women, of course, cis and trans women, and gender nonconforming and non-binary um, as well. Um, Basically anything but cis males, right? So um, this is a video. It has a lot of naked painted women. So just a warning, if you're not okay with that, skip to the 14-minute mark, and it's okay then. But let's go back to this. So um, obviously women are underrepresented in general, in society, and treated wrongly in society, um, like uh, wage gaps, for example, but also something else that's relevant. If this was a discussion class, I would ask, what's going on right now? And it's the the striking down of the Roe versus Wade, which basically is about allowing abortion. So Supreme Court, Congress, government, blah blah blah. Like they're all trying to get rid of abortion, right? And and the thing is, this only like physically affects women, obviously, or I'm gonna take that back. Men can have abortions as well. Just anyone who's capable of having birth. I'm gonna use women as shorthand instead of anyone who's capable of using birth because it'll be a tongue twister. But yeah, notice what's happening here in the art world. Women are basically like they're showing they're okay as long as they're being vulnerable and have power over them. So women are kind of meant to be looked at. Um, the like paintings, for example, are most of the time are it's assumed the viewer is a male, because um, men are painting this, and men have power and money, and so they're the ones who have the privilege to go and see this. Of course, women can come too, but uh, it also assumes that the men are straight or whatever, and women are straight. And with that assumption, of course, this is going to be more geared towards men, naked women. Um, so again, with 85% of the nudes being female, that really heavily skews everything towards putting women in a position of no power, of having no agency. They're just kind of flopped all over the furniture, and like they have no bones. And usually, like you're looking down on them, or they're in a position where they're vulnerable and they can't. Like you can easily imagine yourself looking at them and like looking down upon them, like metaphorically, right? Um, and so that's also obviously carried on forever, with this Roe v. Wade overturn bill thing, right? It's all about controlling women's bodies. Um, it's really fucking stupid that white men, straight white men, are the ones in charge of what a woman can do with her body, right? It makes no sense because they have no idea of what it's like. I don't have any idea what it's like, but if you have a little bit of empathy, you can think about it, talk to women about it, people who can have birth, talk to them about how they feel about it, and talk to them about what you can do about it. Um, and just saying like, "Oh, that sucks." You can't just do that. So it's really important to think about, be empathetic towards people who are underprivileged in this sense. So and it's also like again reinforcing the idea of power of because men and people in power in general don't like no one really wants to give up their power. So doing this is a way to subjugate women to being less powerful, right? It's not about like saving lives or whatever. if it was, there would be more options for um, healthcare for women. But like, I forgot where it was, but birth control pills are like in Ohio, maybe like they're on the chopping block, possibly, or something like that. I think another place is trying to get rid of condoms. Um, like, why is birth control more popular for women and not men? Why isn't that more of a thing? Why are men encouraged to get vasectomies and get them repaired if they really want to have kids, right? Um, Everything falls towards the women. Women are always blamed in this relationship between the false binary of men and women. Um, in this video, this I think he's straight. This white British man, John Berger, he talks about the problems like this, and this sort of thing's important that it's coming from him. Like, this was like a long time ago, like 40, 50 years ago, that he's talking about this problem, and it still persists, right? So all all you really need to do is look at the problems that exist and talk to people who it affects. Like, everyone knows a woman in their life. It's impossible not to. Um, Talk to them about how they feel and ask them what you can do for them. Um, there's there's a lot of problems, and you can't just sit there and do nothing. It's bullshit to do that. Do something. Again, just like any little thing helps. Just spread the word. Um, yeah, no one likes to abort their babies, but there's like, women should have the right to do whatever they want with their bodies. Um, so I don't know. I'm kind of upset. All right, let's move on. All right, teaching is imperfect, learning is imperfect. So this, I did my minor degree in human communication. I was gonna double major in art and human communication, but human communication was just so boring compared to art that I decided I'm just gonna minor in this. So here's this oversimplified communication process. So encoding is this is me taking what I know and creating this message. So in this case, it's this lecture. This is influenced by my subject position. The same thing applies to art historians, authors, etc. So I'm taking the information I know that I've learned, um, that I think is important, and I'm putting it into this lecture. And the communication media is the slideshow and the webcam and the internet. So this is the way I'm communicating to you, because if I just had the encoding part, just the lecture in my head, you wouldn't know anything. If this was physically in person and there was no screen, it was just me. If it's just me talking, communication medium would be my oral speech. Okay, noise, and we're right here. Noise are things that interfere with perfect delivery, which there's no such thing, but basically this includes your puppy barking, bad hearing, not trusting me, the amount of times I say which I don't know if I do it, but I probably do. So these are things like, if your internet goes out, you're gonna have a hard time watching this lecture, right? So noise keeps things from being perfect, and there's no such thing as perfect, because noise will always exist. Because if I'm talking to you, like if you're right in front of my face, um, I still might, and I talk perfectly, like right on script. You still might not understand some words, or I might not say words correctly, or sorry, might not say things that make sense to you. Um, who knows? There's a lot of things that can interfere with that. And decoding is, this is you from your subject position interpreting the message. So that's you basically listening, or watching or reading, um, or feeling vibrations in the air or something like that. So when it comes to communication, there's a lot that goes on that can really affect my message going to you. And that's biased through the fact, well, I'm doing this in the webcam. I use a specific webcam. If I use a higher quality webcam, it might be easier. But I think my webcam's good, and I think my microphone's good, so I assume there shouldn't be any problems there. Um, but some other instructors might have an amazing setup that makes this look really bad. So there's a lot that goes on: encoding, communication, the noise that interrupts it, and how you decode it and how you interpret it. And you have your biases as well. So think about the influence on how much your family has had on your art consumption. So for the assignment this week for my students, it's what has affected your artwork. So again, going back to my example of my mom worked at an art department, and I was surrounded by artists all the time. So I was always exposed to art. Um, my mom was a mathematician instead. I might be into math more. Who knows? Or I might rebel against that. Um, I honestly think I'd probably end up in art regardless. I kind of feel that's just kind of everything I'm into is artistic and weird. Um, so who you are within your family structure definitely helps 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 kind of not determine but influences who you are. And actually, like, my extended family is really into sports, and I hate sports. Like, the more I had to play sports, the more I hated it. And so for me, like, I wanted to do art anyways, but it made me want to do art even more because sports suck. They're terrible. They're like, I'd rather be expressive and be by myself rather than like be outside burning in the sun, like trying to be better than another group of people in a confined field where where there's like very little expression. Like, you have to do these predetermined things with all these stupid rules. Like, I've never understood sports. um well, mini golf and wrestling and boxing, those are my favorite sports, but for different reasons. um so that really influenced me, like both my mom being supportive and my family wanting me to play sports. Like, I went the opposite way. So you can think of it in both those ways. So what kind of art did you see around your neighborhood? Um, Not so much in my neighborhood, but more at my mom's work again. Um, so I got lucky. How many museums, galleries have you willingly been into? Are there any where you grew up? Not in the small town that I went to or that I grew up in. There wasn't that many, but there's plenty around in neighboring cities. So if you're in the middle of nowhere, you're less likely to go to a really nice museum, right? And generally, the more money people have, the bigger the city they'll go to in general, right? And so all that wealth accumulates in a one pocket, and there's not much for these smaller areas, right? So that's economic class thing as well. When you're done with this class, how does your perception in art change? So hopefully you'll enjoy art more. This is an art appreciation class after all. Um, yeah, when I took this class in, gosh, I think like 2009 or so, um, it really opened my eyes a lot more about art. And the more art classes I took, the more I understood what I liked, what I didn't like about art, and I can understand, like, what do I like about art, what do I not like about art. I'm able to understand those better the more I do it, the more I pay attention to it, right? And so with you taking this class, this is only 10 lectures, nine or maybe nine lectures, who knows, depending on what y'all want. That's nothing compared to a lifetime of studying art, right? I'm 34 years old. I've been looking at art pretty much my whole life. That's nothing compared to a 60-year-old. It's nothing even compared to like a 30-year-old who's like doing art every day and going to art exhibits and reading art every day. I do a lot of things outside of art. Um, so how much you interact with art really change. Uh, that helps influence what you think about art. Another very important concept that occurs on your end is, what do you want from art? You'll only get out of art what you put into it. Again, this is a very important thing to me. Um, like I talked about, I kind of care mostly about things that I can immediately connect to. Like I think this composition, I think it's a painting, is really cool. It's really pretty. Um, I love abstract. I love dots. I think the colors are nice. It's just pleasing. I can imagine interactions between the dots if you uh, anthropomorphize them, meaning think of them as humans. You can picture it as a crowd interacting in different ways. Like maybe these are people of different races or different ethnicities or different ages. Um, like interacting with each other. So there's a lot you can get out of that. But some people think, well, this is kind of boring because I want something with humans in them, or I want something with animals, or a beautiful landscape. So it's really heavily dependent on what you want, what you'll get out of art. So that's something you want to always think about. Especially if you're like, this art sucks. Again, why does it suck? We'll talk a lot about more about that next week as well. Um, I would say most of us don't want to be intellectually challenged most of the time, and yes, I am definitely including that. Sometimes when you're maybe like you like being intellectually challenged only when you're in this classroom, like maybe you're just like, I might not think about that ever again, and that's totally fine. But within this class, I'm hoping you're challenging yourself intellectually and expanding your mind on what art can be. I've been heavily failing at including art that I don't like in here, um, because how I do it is I literally just go through the likes on Twitter and go through that, and I forget to like things that I don't enjoy to put in here. So that's my fault. Are you willing to change your mind? That's something that's important here. Is at least for this class, like try to really dig into things. Why do you like this? Why do you not like this? Um, oh, this is going longer than I thought. Are you high and just want to trip out? Like that is a valid reason for wanting art, is to just have psychedelic experiences that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Um, I don't do any psychedelics, um, but I like to have the art do that for me, if that makes sense. Um, I mean, I guess I have a lot of chocolate, but that's not quite psychedelic. So yeah, think a lot about what you want from art and apply that to when you're looking at something you like or you don't like. So this is a website called the White Cube, which is a play on the White Cube. So it's either an 18-minute and 40-second audio file that you can listen to, or a an essay you can read. But White Cube is basically this organization between two women of color in the UK who talk a lot about the issues of what it means to be a person of color, what it means to be a woman. I think one of them might be queer, and yeah, there's a lot that in this about section. This is them. This is their sets, and and they talk a lot about in this piece how there's a lot of coding that goes on within art. Basically, there's a lot of gatekeeping. Like basically, old rich white cis males invent this like nonsensical language in order to exclude people out of it, and how as art history we learn things a very certain specific way, and I'm specifically trying to get out of this weird specific way, um, or this boring specific way and problematic specific way, and I fail, of course. Like i I've probably shown a lot of um, not Matisse, Rene Magritte, for example, Dali, like surrealists, like that's normal people stuff, you know. And I think it's important to include other things that aren't ordinarily within art history, especially in my class because you'll a lot of the things repeat with other classes, but I wouldn't bet that there's a lot of furry stuff going on in other classes. So I'm always trying to bring something different. I'm sick of the art history that is taught in schools most of the time. Um, yeah, even though maybe a lot of the art I do is or art I show probably comes from white people most of the time. I mean, just based on the on demographics alone, like most furries are probably white. That's a problem, but like at least they're furries. That's kind of weird. So I kind of try to show something a little bit different, but again, I fail all the time, and it's always just about trying to do better. Okay, so one more slide. Oh shoot, two more slides. So video game history. So I started this project um, with some internet friends, some sort of video game history that directly addresses this. So it's basically an editable um, history of video games that are important to us. So I basically asked people like, "Hey, what are some like weird or lesser known games that are important to you?" And so there's this. It's a collaboration with some really weird stuff that someone put on within the last week. I think like this wasn't here last week. Castle's Adventure. I've never heard of this, but it's important to this guy called Sergio Cornaga. Um, I, for example, have Don't Look Back, which is a small indie game that changed my life. Gemini Man Stage, for example, this was important to me visually. Um, so yeah, these are like things that are important to us that aren't well known. So we're basically building our own little art history, and it's not coming from just me, even though I started it. It's a bunch of people making this. So I like I like art when it's weird and messy and stuff like that, and that's exactly what this last slide, this video talks about. Basically, it's a summation of this lecture. So yeah, I went to 5 o'clock, a little bit longer than I thought I would, but hope it was helpful. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching. And bye from Clarence and I. Bye.